Man, Bob did not get cheated with that intro, did he? That's a long one and a nice one. But welcome to Fantasy Cares presents the Dynasty Dummies 2025 Rookie Hootenanny. We're back. It's Tuesday, 9:30. Can I say ish? I know that's trademarked, but we got at least half the open bar here, and I feel like Gabe would bless this.
I think he'd be totally okay with that. It's good to be with you today, Zach. How's I think curious and caring minds would like to know how's the healing going from surgery a week plus.
Oh, yeah, we're working on it. It's I'm 2 weeks out. I had my staples out today. I'm another 2 weeks away from starting physical therapy, so it's a lot of laying on the couch with my foot up in the air. But we're getting there, JMic. It's a long road, but we'll be back. Probably not shooting jump shots, but we'll definitely be back podcasting from the other room. I know people are missing my red wall behind me, so we're getting there. It's fun to be here. It's fun to not be thinking about work. It's fun to not be thinking about my knee and be talking the quarterbacks and the tight ends in this 2025 class. And I think there's a little bit of a dichotomy there where the tight ends are really helping this class. The quarterbacks, maybe not so much.
So much to be determined, and in many cases, so much to be desired for some of these guys that we'll talk about today. But Zach, as you mentioned, we've got 8 players that we'll be talking through today, 3 quarterbacks, all of which, if you look at the right mock or 2, are projecting to go in the first round, along with 5 tight ends, 2 of which are also looking to be first-round players. So we're looking at perhaps 5 players today, Zach, that we could be seeing going early in our fantasy drafts. And I think that for folks who have followed the program for quite some time, thank you, by the way, for those people, they're going to wonder, hey, are either of these tight ends Zach Reed approved for being taken in the first round of fantasy drafts? Now, obviously, we've got time to determine those things, and you're going to be able to talk a good deal today about all of these players. But before we even get into the scouting, a quick word. Everyone, thank you so much for the love and the support and the appreciation that you show. The messages, the thank yous, the views, the comments, all of which, as we continue the Rookie Hootenanny, a labor of love that we've often been excited, blessed, and encouraged to continue for our care for each other, for our care of the Dynasty Dummies brand, and for our care for you all who continue to support us. Thank you all. This is something that we thoroughly enjoy. And whether this is your first time checking us out or the year 8, 9, whatever it's been that I know at least Zach has been doing this. Thank you. Just thank you. We appreciate it. But enough of all the tears and the thank yous and the Oscar speeches. Zach, what has been on the mind of you as you ponder from the couch?
So I saw a really great post on Blue Sky this week by Scott Rainier, who is at Munder Difflin FF, if you're out there looking for this tweet. And it was a fantastic look at rookie season in fantasy output, matrixed with draft capital in the NFL draft. And it really went back to me to show why you and I specifically talk about top 3 round capital being huge for not only running backs, but wide receivers, basically everybody in the draft, because the production drops off precipitously after day 1 and 2. And it was interesting to see the vast majority of RB1 and RB2 seasons for rookies come from, I mean, obviously first round players, but there were only 17 in the last, whatever it was, 10 or 12 years that Scott looked at. But also that second round pick and the third round picks, basically all of the running back 1 and 2 seasons come from those players. And that to me is interesting. It says counting on rookies isn't ideal, but it also says to me, understand what the data you're looking at is saying and also what it's not saying. Because, yes, it's important to understand that those players are scoring the running back 1, running back 2 seasons, but it's also important to note the way we look at running backs is not necessarily in terms of a full season. Because when we talk about roster construction and we talk about layering running backs at the back end of your roster, you're not necessarily getting full seasons out of those players. What you're looking for is the ability for a player to come in and give you a week or 2 or 4 of running back 1 or running back 2 production in the event of an injury break glass situation. And I think that's important because what Scott did was awesome. And the focus of what he did was tremendous, and the data supports. I always love when we give the anecdotal evidence and then somebody does the actual work to put in that we can point to and say, look, the numbers agree with what we're saying. But also understand when you're looking at numbers, and there are a lot of really brilliant metrics analysts out there, understand what the numbers that they're looking at is saying and understand what the numbers are not saying. Because again, it's that yes, the running back 1 season is rare and usually reserved for those top early drafted players. But also what we're looking for is a talented player who may fall, who may get an opportunity later. It's not necessarily right off. We're not looking for the plug and play to start, but we're looking for the player who can fill in and give us those boost weeks when we need it. And also, I mean, you may end up with a player, an additional starter headed into the playoffs or at a time when you really need it. So again, great work by Scott Rainier. Also got me thinking about how we look at prospects, how we look at the running back elevator and that wide receiver escalator, which is why wide receivers tend to be roster cloggers. If they're not uber productive right off the bat, I know it's hard to give up that unrequited love, but sometimes you got to do it.
It's painful. It's painful when we do have to end up giving that up. But you're exactly right, Zach. In order for us to try to be our best selves, finding that space and being quicker than maybe we want to move on those instances is super important. Man, another great musing. Thank you for sharing. All right, y'all, for what you've been waiting for, 8 players to get to, so we will not waste time. 3 quarterbacks, and that's where we're going to start with projected first quarterback off the board. And really the story begins at Little University Incarnate Word, transferring to Washington State, transferring to Miami, becoming a Heisman finalist, and in all likelihood, likely the number 1 pick in the 2025 NFL draft, Cam Ward. Cam Ward again begins his collegiate journey, not even at the Division I level, transfers to Washington State, puts up a couple of really impressive seasons there and gets better statistically all over the place in both of those seasons. And for his final season in 2024, he transfers to the University of Miami, the U, down there in Coral Gables, Florida, throws for 4,313 yards, 39 touchdowns, 7 interceptions. Cam Ward, not the biggest in the actual quarterback pool. However, Zach, he might be the best, question mark?
He's definitely up there. It's nearly impossible to teach accuracy. Sure, you can tweak technique. You can explain theory and practice reading defensive looks and how to counter them. But Cam Ward completing 66% of his career passes, that stands out to me. It's something that he carries with him to the next level, a tool in his belt to help him succeed against the best players in the world. And a lot of Ward's accuracy and his success stems from his ability to assess the play in front of him while he debates that run pass option. So often Ward hits that first read after pulling down the ball after an RPO, getting the ball out quickly into the hands of that primary receiver. Ward has excellent accuracy also to the boundaries as long as he's getting the ball out quickly. And you're going to hear this again and again and again with these quarterbacks. A lot of their success depends on getting that ball out. And he takes the pressure off himself when he does that, and also off his offensive line. And when he has time to set his feet, man, Ward can drop some deep throws downfield, setting up his receivers for success. Ward is even mobile enough to scramble out of trouble when he remembers to move the pocket, although I don't believe that that's a primary asset, a primary avenue of attack for Ward.
I can't remember which James Bond film it is, Zach. You'll probably know this. I can't even remember exactly how the tune went, but maybe it's just Die Another Day. Is that one of the films? I have that song just running on repeat in my mind as I watch Cam Ward play. Guess I'll die another day. Like, just consistently not willing to let any play die, period, point blank. And I love the fact that he is willing to do what is necessary on a game in, game out basis to help his team win. I love, even though oddly he's got this kind of unorthodox, weird sidearmy delivery, he's able to layer the ball at any level of the field, and it doesn't look like he's having to do a whole lot of putting his whole body into it or anything of that nature to be successful on deep throws, intermediate throws, and even short throws. He's got a really quick delivery once the actual ball is getting in flight, or his throwing motion, I should say. And I do think that from a standpoint, and one of the things that I've not done a very good job of over our time in scouting, Zach, is just quarterback identification in terms of kind of what I see in them as prospects and then how that translates to them at the next level. One of the things that I do find to be successful in Cam Ward's game is he's not afraid to throw over the middle, and he's successful in consistently doing so. The guy's a playmaker, period, point blank. But even though he's as great of a playmaker as he is, Zach, there's a reason that people are saying this is not a quarterback class that people are excited about. So tell us a little bit about the drawbacks for Cam Ward.
Yeah, unfortunately, when Ward is pressured, I see him become the little brother overwhelmed playing Madden for the first time against that older brother. He bounces back and back and back and back in the face of that blitz rather than stepping up and putting the pressure back on the defense. I think Ward also refuses sometimes to take off and scramble, even though the defender is bearing down on him. And you talk about him never giving up on the play. Sometimes running is creating a new play and a better play where you're giving up on the pass, but he doesn't like to do that. He wants to make that play downfield. When Ward underthrows one of his receivers, it's almost invariably because he threw it off his back foot, but not just that. When he does it, he has a tendency to pick up his back foot on a release, which is this weird little quirk. Mm-hmm. Sometimes you see it with infielders in baseball, and I think that zaps some of the power that he has on his throw. And he does have easy power when he gets his feet set and everything going forward. Ward is really talented as a quarterback, and he's a really accurate passer. He should be taken in the NFL draft very early. You mentioned he's probably the one overall, and he should be a viable starter for both his professional team and as a fantasy asset in Superflex leagues. While there's definitely upside with his passing prowess, I think Cam Ward feels a little bit more like a tweener between that quarterback 1 and quarterback 2. So I don't see him necessarily as one of those quarterbacks we throw up into the top 6. And we've seen some quarterbacks thrown into the top 6 that
Mhm.
probably shouldn't have been there based on the lack of rushing and how much that matters to fantasy.
Yeah, agreed there. And I think one of the things that as we project him to the next level, getting away from the analysis just for a moment, one of the things that you hope is that when he gets to Tennessee is that he can be an elevator of the talent that's there, because it doesn't necessarily seem as though he is going to be dropped in some amazing space with an offensive line that's strong, because obviously it was really bad last year, and weapons that, again, when I think Nick Westbrook-Ikine, I think, has double-digit touchdowns and there's not much else in the passing game that was positive. Hey, you've got Tony Pollard. That's a good thing. It's just kind of unnerving to a degree. But when thinking through Cam Ward, drawbacks, ball security tends to consistently be an issue for him, specifically from the standpoint of fumbles. Just key moments. I remember the game against Duke. The defense couldn't do anything to really keep them in the game, and so he's trying to get them together for one final drive, and he ended up getting hit, and ball comes out. And there's several instances where, in his playmaking, the ball is put on the ground. And again, only 7 interceptions in this past season, which we'll take that all day, especially for the onus of the offense that he had on his back at Miami. And I do think, even though he measured at 6'2", I feel like he plays smaller than that in many instances. And with the sidearm release, not so much that the pocket is always collapsing in on him, but I'm curious how that plays at the next level when he's trying to process, and if he's not running around and finding space. Is it going to be a case where the sidearm delivery becomes problematic for him at the next level? So yeah, curious how that's going to look going forward for Cam Ward. But again, I actually like his ability quite a bit, and for what he provides, or what he could provide for an NFL offense. Moving on to Mr. Shedeur Sanders. Yeah, that Dion boy right there. That Dion boy. Shedeur began his collegiate career at Jackson State, just like his teammate Travis Hunter, and just like his coach and dad, Deion Sanders, did in coaching. After a couple of really strong seasons at Jackson State, transfers to Colorado. He's honorable mention All Pac-12 in that first season in 2023. And then really in 2024 is when he takes off, because in 2024, he's a second-team AP All-American, Big 12 Offensive Player of the Year, first-team All-Big 12, finalist for the Davey O'Brien Award, which is the nation's top quarterback. He sets a school record with 64 career passing touchdowns, and he led the FBS by completing a school record 74% of his 477 passes. Kind of crazy stuff, Zach, when you think about how that lays out. Again, 74% completion percentage on 477 passes on the season. He throws for 4,134 yards, 37 touchdowns, 10 interceptions. No, Colorado was not the team that many had anticipated them being in terms of this major turnaround with Shedeur. However, the program was in a much better space with Shedeur in it than they were prior to Shedeur and company getting there. Shedeur Sanders, perhaps the most accurate of the bunch of quarterbacks. Zach, your turn on Shedeur.
If you don't throw it, it's hard to have an incompletion. But in less than 3 seconds, Americans consume over 1,300 cheeseburgers. In less than 3 seconds, Michael Jordan makes $7.50 in Nike royalties. In 2.4 seconds, Universal's Velocicoaster accelerates to 70 miles an hour before dropping you 140 feet over the top hat. And when Shedeur Sanders gets the ball out of his hands in less than 3 seconds, good things happen. Sanders is deadly accurate when he gets the ball out quickly, dicing up defenses with short and intermediate throws. With a clean pocket, I think he does a really good job cycling through progressions of receivers, finding the open one, often Travis Hunter deep, and checking down or even throwing the ball away to reset the play. And that, I think, is something that doesn't get talked about enough as positive, but it really is when a quarterback has the wherewithal to get rid of the ball and then make it another play on the next down. With Travis Hunter patrolling the boundaries, Sanders was never shy about throwing the ball deep. He did a pretty good job anticipating receivers open deep at the second level. I think over the middle is a little different thing. And although he lost 127 yards on 211 carries in his career, that's right, negative 127 yards rushing, Sanders is actually mobile enough to move the pocket and make accurate throws when he resets his feet.
He's such a conundrum for me in some instances in reference to his play style, because I do think that in a lot of the short to intermediate game, the ball looks like it comes out with a pretty decent bit of pop. He's able to, and as you said before, Zach, when he's on time, things look really fun for him because his ability to place the ball where it needs to be in many instances, especially in a clean pocket, I will say, especially in a clean pocket, he does and has a lot of success in delivering to where the ball needs to be when it needs to be there. Some other questions, though, come when he's holding the ball a little too long, because I know this kind of gets into the negatives per se, or the opportunities, but there are so many times where his game does not fit the way that it's supposed to, because for the accuracy and the anticipation that I think that he shows in some instances, and for the accuracy that he has, like, that anticipation should be a real strong thing for him, because I think about the likes of the Brock Purdy's of the world. I think about the likes of even Tua sometimes. Tua's kind of been hit and miss of late, but specifically with Brock Purdy is not a see it, throw it. He is this is the timing, and I'm placing the ball, and I'm expecting you to be out of the break and be in the space that you should be. And I want more of that from Shedeur, because I think that his ability to place the ball should match that. But there's so many times where he waits to see it. And it's a really, really weird, I don't want to keep using this word, but I think about cognitive dissonance of these competing cognitions. It doesn't match. But what are some of your thoughts on what pulls us away from Shedeur Sanders?
I think sometimes Sanders' scrambling feels haphazard, like he's moving the pocket simply to escape rather than having a purpose to set himself up for his next move. And I think that's probably a lot of what you're seeing too with that lag in anticipatory throwing. Although if he's moving the pocket, at least he still has life. So often Sanders' attention is downfield, and I think he loses track of what's going on immediately in front of him, takes a lot of sacks. He ends up holding the ball a beat too long and going down, taking that sack. The ball also seems to stick in his hand too long when he's targeting receivers over the middle. That hesitation costing him catches and occasionally an interception. Like, there are times where he threw the ball behind, or he threw the ball into traffic that wasn't there when he should have thrown the ball, but because he's just that half beat too slow, man, it becomes a problem. I think Sanders, again, is another one of these quarterbacks that, because the NFL has driven up the perceived value of quarterbacks, he's going to go early in this draft. But in order for him to be successful, he needs to get the ball out early and consistently, and he needs to be protected. He may not be racing raptors, but it doesn't take very long for NFL pass rushers to find their prey, and they're pack hunters.
Yeah. Oh, man. Shedeur is a curious case, man. I think there are some fun things that he does, but from a standpoint of quote unquote NFL arm, as people call it, specifically for the deep balls, sometimes he's able to just get it out, but there's a ton of air under the ball. And go ahead.
Oh, there's a really interesting point by John Byrne in the chat where he says, I'm not a huge college watcher, but is it maybe a case of Travis Hunter elevating like Mike Evans did for Manziel? And there are so many times when Hunter bails out,
yes,
throws that were underthrown or kind of ballooned up there. So yeah, like I think there is some of that going on Shedeur Sanders tape where Travis Hunter is just so stinking good that he makes up for a lot of the sins.
Yeah. Yeah. Shedeur is interesting, and I'm curious to see where he lands, but kind of slight in build, not the biggest of arms, and not necessarily a threat on the ground when it comes to consistently getting yards, rushing and escaping from the pocket. So I'm curious where the upside lies with his play type if we didn't see that at the collegiate level. So more to come, obviously, as we figure that out for Shedeur. Moving on now, quarterback number 3 and the final quarterback on the evening, Jaxson Dart, started his career out at USC. That's the University of Southern California. Not to be confused with USC. Shout out to our boy Foreman and the boys at the FF Dynasty out in South Carolina. Anywho, Jaxson Dart transfers from USC to Ole Miss. Once he gets to Ole Miss, obviously he got the Lane Midas touch, the Lane Kiffin Midas touch in terms of play style. In this last season, first team All SEC, he set school records with 10,617 passing yards and 12,115 yards of total offense. He led the FBS with 10.8 yards per attempt, and he had 4,774 yards of total offense. The guy flat out was productive all over the place in that final season, Zach, as I mentioned, 4,279 yards passing, 29 touchdowns, 6 interceptions. This is not the first quarterback that we've seen put up big numbers in the Ole Miss offense with Lane Kiffin calling plays. What makes Jaxson Dart different?
We've barred the gates, but we cannot hold them for long. The ground shakes. Drums in the deep. An ADP moves in the mocks. We cannot escape. The Jaxson Dart truthers are coming. Every year in the pre-draft process, there's a player who continues to gain traction, whose drumbeat gets so loud that we can't ignore it. And this year, Jaxson Dart is on the move. And that's fitting given his ability to add value with his legs, either on designed runs or on scrambles. And he's not a predominant runner, but man, he can get it done a little bit. Dart is also very accurate from the pocket. And if he's left unchecked, he'll go through his progression all the way down to the check down, which you really like to see. What makes Dart so tantalizing to me, though, is that a few times a game, he'll make a play with his arm that is absolutely dazzling. And I think that's what people are really excited about. I think people forget that you can't dream without a foundation. You got to have the foundation. And he'll drop balls in the bucket for chunk yardage. And it didn't hurt that he was throwing to one of my favorite receivers this year in Trey Harris. But I do think it's worth going back and watching some of Dart's games earlier in Dart's games at USC, because he was still that guy, even though he wasn't being lifted up by a Lane Kiffin offense. And he didn't get a ton of opportunities, but man, what he did, he put some good things on tape.
Yeah, and Zach, one of the things that you and I messaged about previously, his highlights, his highs, his really good is as good as anybody in the class. When you think about passing the ball, I think that his ability, and probably more so than either of his peers, to consistently work the pocket and even move up in the pocket to be able to deliver, again, a lot of those bombs to the Trey Harris and those alike in the Ole Miss offense. I really like his ability there. Also, while he does give you a little bit in terms of the scrambling and the athleticism there, he's also willing to check down the ball. And in a different way than either Shedeur or Cam, he knows when to say die. He was like, yes, I did. It's over with. Let me get rid of this. And those things. And I do think that even from a pressure standpoint, when the pocket is collapsing, I don't consistently find him with happy feet or looking as though he is ready to run for his life, or that he's just kind of collapsing or shrinking in the pocket, which also I think is a sign of that maturity and his ability to get as many repetitions as he's had over these last several years, especially the last 3 seasons with Lane Kiffin, with the highs and the lows there. So I do think there are some good things to Jaxson Dart, but what would you call some of the opportunities in his game?
The flip side of Dart's dazzling plays is that he will also lock onto a receiver and throw the ball directly into traffic, sometimes double, triple coverage, sometimes the middle of zones. Many of his turnovers are throws that he should never have chanced making in the first place. Dart also makes some, we'll call them Ken Caminiti throws off his back foot, where like he uses that AstroTurf. He spikes the ball into the turf like that third baseman using a hop to get it over to first.
Zach, they're not going to know Ken Caminiti unless they're.
I know. Go get on. I was going to say go get on YouTube. You may have to find a VHS player. Yes. dig out some tape. Send me, DM me your address. I'll send you. I got some like 1994 year in sports. We'll get you going. But when Dart has trouble behind the line of scrimmage, it's usually because he's lost track of a defender that got behind him and then comes from behind to make a sack. So it's not necessarily that he's not processing what's in front of him, but he forgets or loses track that the pocket has gotten behind him. As often and as successfully as Dart scrambles, it's scary to watch him consistently fail to protect himself at the end of runs. He takes a lot of shots and a lot of like upper body shots, which you don't love to see. Like the Orcs overrunning the mines of Moria, Jaxson Dart feels inevitable following the recent drumbeat. He may not enter the league as a starter on day one, but I do think he has enough talent as a thrower and skills as a runner to be fantasy relevant if he gets a chance to start, especially in a down quarterback class. Dart could end up with capital opportunity and end up being a steal.
Man, I think the life and times of Jaxson Dart are fascinating, and I think the touch that both Cam Ward and Shedeur consistently show in my mind, we don't always get that from him, and I think that may partly be a base situation for him when it comes to kind of his throwing base. I'm not deep enough into the quarterback woods to be able to tell you that that's the case, but I do think that his touch at times is not where it needs to be, especially when he has people streaking wide open. I feel like there were many instances, and similar to Drake May, which obviously it's not been a problem for Drake May, and I don't want to go about trying to look at Jaxson Dart through the lens of Drake May, but I think about all the times where you're just like, man, layup throw, why are you missing that? Like layup throw, why are you missing that? That happened a lot, which was bothersome. But regardless, I do think Jaxson Dart again provides some interesting, tantalizing possibilities, and even more so, I think one of the more fascinating things, Zach, all three of those guys 6'2" and below. Cam Ward, Shedeur, and Jaxson Dart, all 6'2" and under. So
John Elway hates this class. He hates it.
Marino, Elway, all looking down on these dudes like, who are you? What is this? What happened to the NFL I love? What happened to the game I love? All right. It's enough for quarterbacks for one day. And I know that many of you probably might even be thinking about the likes of a Jalen Milroe out of Alabama, a Will Howard out of Ohio State, a Riley Leonard out of Notre Dame. Maybe it had been a Dylan Gabriel out of Oregon or Quinn Ewers, and they didn't quite make the cut for us. If there's someone that you really want to know about, catch-alls are coming. I know we're definitely going to revisit Jalen Milroe for the catch-alls, but if there's a player that you want to see or listen to us talk through, please let us know. because we were not super enthused to be able to dive in to this group. But as Mr. Byrne puts in the chat as well, Jaxson Dart is such a great QB name, and if it was simply based off of name, I think that Jaxson Dart's likely the 101 in this class. On to the next one. Now we're at tight ends, and we're starting with Penn State's finest, Tyler Warren. Tyler Warren, 6'5", 256, went to the combine, and people were curious as to how he might perform, and we didn't get a ton of testing from him, if I recall. But all of that said, this 2024 season, he really showed off and showed out. He wins the John Mackey Award, which is for the nation's top tight end. He was a second-team AP All-American, Big Ten Conference Tight End of the Year, first-team All-Big Ten. Lots of positives and lots of wins to his name, and he even finished 7th in the Heisman voting, Zach, which, again, I don't know the last time, at least in my mind, that I can think of a tight end finishing that high for a team, obviously with the Penn State Nittany Lions, in the college football playoff and doing some positive things on their way to, I believe, the semifinals, which is when they got put out. 104 catches, 1,233 yards, and 8 touchdowns in this final season. Zach, some have dared to compare him to last season's phenom, one Brock Bowers. I won't dare do such blasphemous things. However, Tyler Warren is a pretty darn good player on his own right.
Yeah, stop with the Bowers. Stop with the Bowers. I know. I've seen it. I've seen people make that and like, look, Bowers is one of the top 2 players, full stop players, not position players that I've evaluated. Saquon, Bowers, drop your voice. Like, that's it. Like, those are the 2 generational talents for my evaluation process that there have been. Tyler Warren doesn't quite get there, but it seems like every single season Penn State is offering up an uber athletic, tremendously talented, top of position prospect for the Dynasty draft community to argue about. Tyler Warren fed into that discourse by putting up more than 1,200 yards, having the 104 catches, and then declining to test at the combines. Numbers nerds. You don't get your argument. But the thing that pops off to me about Tyler Warren's tape again and again is his ability to add yards after the catch by simply carrying his defender with him. It's not an avoid player. It's not a break tackle. It's just like, come on, we're going for a ride. We're going to go an extra 5 yards. And that strength also allows him to make plays with defenders draped on him and to win high point plays at the catch point. He's a quiet catcher, especially close to the line of scrimmage, and he will adjust to off-target throws. Perhaps the perfect use of Tyler Warren as a weapon is on a quick slant where he can make the catch with his momentum already taking him upfield so that he doesn't have to make a cut. He can just go and rumble for more yards.
And while he's not the smoothest of players, Zach, in terms of his general movements, there's a certain air of him that is versatile enough in the running game, in being put in motion, in catching the ball near the line of scrimmage, in catching the ball at the intermediate, in catching the ball deep, in lining up in Wildcat. He offers a lot of fun and versatility, and picturing him with a creative offensive mind, the likes of a Sean Payton, and just thinking about sometimes how he leveraged Taysom Hill, and that, like, it just kind of gets you dreaming that positive things could be on the horizon for Tyler Warren. I do think that he does a great job of being able to catch the ball outside of his frame. I like the way that he's able to go up, stretch out, and make plays in that instance. And I do think that he is a strong hands catcher, and he's willing to lower the boom for the run after the catch. And while he's not necessarily some crazy ankle breaker or angle understander, I would say in many instances, I do think that he does provide plenty of after the catch positivity that in space he makes defenses pay, whereas most tight ends don't. And I like what he's able to offer in that regard. That said, Zach, Tyler Warren, not Brock Bowers. What cons do you have for Mr. Warren?
Even as big and as strong as Warren is, I think he can be rerouted and neutralized by a physical defender before he's got the ball. He also struggles to separate against zone coverages, which drives me nuts. I think he misreads the cushion he's being given and often sits down too close to defenders, which makes a tougher throw for the quarterback, sometimes deflections, incompletions. Warren is absolutely able to block, but I don't think he always is clear on what his assignment is, especially pass blocking. Even though most of Warren's yards are after the catch and they come from running through defenders, if the initial defensive back can hit him low and hit him quick at the catch point, I think he can be stopped before he inflicts too much damage. Tyler Warren spent a chunk of his Nittany Lion career as an understudy to Theo Johnson, but man, he blossomed when he finally got his chance to be featured in 2024. Chances are, to me, that an NFL team makes its move early in the draft to add a potential difference maker and offensive weapon at the tight end position. And Warren should deliver, even if he's not quite in that elite tier of tight ends.
Yeah, and I think you mentioned this as well, Zach, in terms of play strength at the initial catch point and before he's really got the engine going, because once the engine's going, that's when he just becomes a load to bring down. But even in the midst of a route without ball in hand, there was just instances of the reroutes and a lot of the nuance that you'd hope that he is not consistently pinballing off of people in many instances. But Tyler Warren's a fun player, and though not the smoothest mover, as I've mentioned before, and being somewhat stiff, I really like Tyler Warren a lot. And I'm curious to see, especially if he goes in the first round, what that's going to look like in our fantasy drafts, because he's one that I can see people really getting the steam behind, and people will be Tyler Warren bulls for sure. And I think he's going to be fantastic at the next level. I really like that. I really like him as a player. I do, straight up. Moving on, Colton Loveland, tight end out of Michigan. Colton Loveland measured at 6'6", 248 at the combine. Sheesh, big fella. Made a couple of all Big Ten teams in 23 and 24, and was a finalist for the Mackey Award that he did not win, that obviously Tyler Warren won this past season in 2024. But Colton Loveland did some positive things for a Michigan Wolverine team that took a step back this past year. In that team that won the national championship in 2023, he had 45 catches for 649 yards. Now, that was over 15 games. In only 10 games this season in 2024, 56 catches for 582 yards, 5 touchdowns, and I believe 2 quarterbacks who could not get him the ball consistently enough in Alex Orji and Davis Warren. Colton Loveland, let's talk about him, Zach.
The Swiss Army knife is actually German. Yeah, you read that right. The versatile multi-tool pocket knife is actually an Offiziersmesser, an officer's knife. But during World War II, American soldiers couldn't pronounce it and started calling them Swiss Army knives. Colton Loveland is easy to say, and you should get used to that name because he is talented and versatile at the tight end position. At 6'5", nearly 250 pounds, you'd expect him to block, and he absolutely delivers. Loveland gets great push on run blocks, often taking his defender completely out of the play. And he's not just a blocker, however. Loveland has excellent hands and should immediately contribute as a pass catcher. The thing I really like about him is that he can create separation at the top of his routes with quickness, as well as being able to use his strength and length to separate physically when he gets into a defender. He really surprised me pleasantly when I started watching his film.
Big slot vibes when it comes to Colton Loveland. Much smoother of a mover than you'd anticipate with how big he is on the field. And even when you go from watching Tyler Warren tape to Colton Loveland tape, the way that he moves is just so different. And and again, a lot of the things that you see in Tyler Warren, where he's reaching to get the ball outside of his frame, showing strong hands, and a lot of that is separated when you think about how he operates at the top of the route, as you just said, Zach, as well as how he's able to operate in traffic at the catch point and even on the sidelines. There's not much foul that I'm going to be saying about Colton Loveland's game because I am very in on him as a player. Zach, what are the drawbacks on Loveland?
As the prototypical tight end, I think Loveland can be a bit of a bully, initiating contact, whether he's blocking or en route. Unfortunately, this similar approach leaves him fighting through contact a lot to create separation, where he comes up, initiates that contact, hits a defender, and then is forced to try to re-separate. While it's not always an issue, when Loveland is in tight quarters with a defender, he's occasionally more interested in delivering that punishment than creating space. And although I think he's more than capable of playing in line, he was rarely shifted inside, leaving the chance that he gets pigeonholed out as a move tight end, which I would rather see a two-way tight end than a specific move tight end. Colton Loveland looks like the total package. He looks like a tight end with strength enough to block, speed enough to separate, tremendous hands in traffic or in space. He's got everything but a corkscrew and a nail file. Look for Loveland to be a contributor at tight end early on, especially if he lands somewhere with a young quarterback who needs to lean on him.
Yeah, just he seems very much like the type that's going to have opportunity abounding for him if he's able to get on the field to ideally receive targets at anywhere specifically short to intermediate. But his acceleration abilities are outstanding. I think one of the things that I will say, and I know I wouldn't say anything about anything ill about Colton Loveland, but from a standpoint of after the catch, I want more with as smooth of a mover as he is. And even as Coop puts in the chat here, excited to see him break his first ever tackle someday. Just not always the run power and strength when thinking through after the ball is in his hands. But man, before so the way that he moves, it's just big slot vibes.
This class gives me the Kincaid Laporta, where everybody was on Kincaid. Not everybody was on Kincaid. There were a few people on Laporta, but where everyone was on Kincaid, and Kincaid went in the first round, and then Laporta ended up being the steal. Like I get those vibes here. I really do.
Fascinating. Yeah, that's good stuff. Good stuff. Let's move on. We've got three more tight ends to get to. Harold Fannin Jr. being the next of which, 6'3", 241, not quite as big as folks would have hoped, and not quite as fast as folks would have hoped either. Running a 4.71 in the 40, not as explosive as people would have hoped he would be. 9 foot 10-inch broad jump. But when you think about what he's actually doing on the field, dude is a stud. First team All-MAC in 2023, parlays that into 2024, where he's first team AP All-American. He's a MAC player of the year. He's the offensive player of the year. And he's the first tight end in FBS history to win conference player of the year. That is pretty absurd stuff. He's, again, first team All-MAC and a finalist for that same Mackey Award that we've been discussing. Here's where things get nutty, Zach. His first season in 2022, 19 catches, 218 yards. Okay, cool. Nice of you to break on the scene that way. 2023, as a sophomore, 44 catches, 623 yards. Okay, we're really cooking with gas here. 6 touchdowns. All right. 2024, 117 catches for 1,555 yards and 10 touchdowns. These are not numbers of a mere mortal. These are numbers of a son of Zeus. Tell us about Hercules Harold Fannin.
Size matters, JMic. You need to be at least 4'7" to ride Formula Rossa, the world's fastest roller coaster. Right field grandstand seats at Fenway Park are just under 15 inches wide, so my rear end doesn't fit in them. The ideal height for a successful NFL tight end is 6'5" or greater. Harold Fannin is going to need to invest in some lifts in order for the metrics crowd to give him their blessing. Fannin's size, though, doesn't appear to be an issue as a run blocker. He routinely blasts off the line of scrimmage and drives his defender out of the way. He is a separator, creating space with quick, decisive cuts at the stem of routes and deep separation with his deceptive speed. Fannin tracks deep throws really well and hauls them in with quiet hands at the catch point. And once he's got the ball, I think Fannin is incredibly creative in space. He slips would-be tacklers and hits those angles to really add yards after the catch.
Angle breaker. So excited to be able to see a tight end really make the most in those opportunities with the ball in hand. And again, a different mover when you're watching him on a snap in, snap out basis. I do think that with him being undersized, I'm curious how that translates. But as far as when the ball's in his hand at the tight end position, I mean, you can think of the Jonnu Smiths, you can think of the Chigakonkwo's, you can think of all of these fun, a little bit not prototypical size players that we've seen flashes of that people get really excited about. And Harold Fannin fits really neatly into that kind of lineage of the smaller tight end that is doing some really positive work with the ball in his hand after the catch. And the things that he was able to do, and again, talk about the level of competition, you can talk about all of those things, but the burst that he was showing on film was really fun to be able to see in and out in and out of breaks, and obviously with the ball in his hand too. But again, he's the third tight end that we're talking about today, Zach. Tell us what you didn't love about Harold Fannin's game.
The size deficiencies rear their head when a defender can get in close to Fannin early in route and push him off course. And I think this gets exacerbated by Fannin's tendency to be a bit lumbering immediately off the line of scrimmage. It's probably where you saw that 40 time too. I don't think he's a quick starter. And that gives defenders a chance to initiate contact. Although he's not a bad pass blocker, he repeatedly releases his pass blocks too early, putting unnecessary pressure on his quarterback when he doesn't actually have to give up on that block. And Fannin's creativity after the catch is occasionally stifled by him turning the wrong way, turning toward a defender in the aftermath of a catch rather than turning toward space. Fannin is undersized, but he was incredibly productive as an offensive weapon at Bowling Green. It's important to remember that while thresholds do help us sort out the players with the most likely path to success, it's not out of the realm of possibilities that a 6'3", 240-ish pound tight end makes his mark at the next level. We saw one last year, literally 3 pounds heavier than Fannin. Size matters, but it's important to remember that it's not the only thing. Unless you're over 6'7", because then definitely don't ride Formula Rossa. It's going to take your head off.
Yeah, I like my head on my shoulders, but I'm also not 6'7", so there's that. We'll move forward to keep the pace going here with 2 tight ends left. Senior Bowl standout Elijjah Arroyo out of the University of Miami. Elijjah Arroyo weighs in at 6'5", 250, and spent about 11 years in college. Yes, much of that was because he had multiple injuries and just a lot of chaos that went on in terms of his time at the U. However, this final season, when he was healthy and able to be part of a functional team with a functional quarterback and a functional offense, lo and behold, 35 catches, 590 yards, and 7 touchdowns. Again, player from the Senior Bowl who showed out, was the talk of the town in many instances, performed really well, obviously, with Cam Ward and obviously in the same offense as Xavier Restrepo, other people that might be getting looks in the draft as well when we think about Damian Martinez, players all around, NFL players there for that Miami offense. Elijjah Arroyo, what say you, Zach?
Before this season, Elijjah Arroyo wasn't on many radars. He wasn't being picked up by sonar or LiDAR either. After tearing his ACL just 4 games into his sophomore year, Arroyo's career appeared derailed after only 7 catches. But a solid 2024 campaign and an impressive showing at the Reese's Senior Bowl has him back as a buzzy name here during draft season.
Mm-hmm.
One of the easiest ways to get noticed is by breaking big plays, and that happens to be Arroyo's specialty. He has tremendous long speed and gets over the top of defenders who underestimate just how fast he is, and he does it against both zone coverage and man, which is interesting to me. And Arroyo doesn't just excel on deep routes. He's also good at getting open underneath the defense and then using his athleticism to tack on extra yards post-catch.
Yeah, it seems as though he consistently is able to, and I think that this is where it's going to feed him well at the next level, is his ability to work in the middle of the field. I think is really strong, and his oftentimes how strong that he can be specifically in dealing with contact even at the top of a route. He opts for physicality versus the ducking and the dodging. I think in many instances that Colton Loveland may opt for in those instances. And I don't know if it's because he doesn't have the same burst, but I think he shows fine, not special in that instance. But even the things that he was doing at the Senior Bowl, he's working dudes. And he's like, okay, well, I wanted more of this on the film because this is a lot of fun. I'm not sure where this came from, but what were some of the drawbacks for you, Zach?
Yeah, it's interesting the juxtaposition to see Arroyo's measurements at 6'5" and 250 and the way he plays, which sometimes feels much, much smaller. He struggles with contact close to the line of scrimmage, and also sometimes with making plays in traffic. And while deep shots and work underneath are really his fortes, he's far less successful working the intermediate areas where quickness and craftiness dominate. And as a blocker, I think Arroyo tends to occupy defenders rather than bend them to his will. So he's not a mover of people. He's just kind of getting in the way and hoping that takes up enough time to free up his quarterback or the running back. There will be flashes of brilliance where Elijjah Arroyo gets over the top of a defense and splits the seam and puts up a huge gain. The talent on any given play is undeniable, but I think Arroyo feels like a tertiary offensive option at the next level rather than a primary target driver, and that feels really frustrating for fantasy game to game.
Yeah, to be as big as he is, I think that becomes the, maybe not nail in the coffin, but the biggest con for me is you don't play 6'5", 250, even though you weighed in at 6'5", 250. And that's at the catch point. That's at just about anywhere on the field when you think that should be an advantage that allows him to be a trump card to win. It is not consistent enough. Positive with his actual hands, which I think is good. I think I saw the stat, and even I'm seeing it on the film too. And I don't even think I saw the one drop, but he only had one drop on the season. Man, he reminds me, for me, He reminds me of Chase Brown from a couple of seasons ago, or was it last season, whenever it was, in that when I watched him, I kept wanting more. It's like, man, I really like that. Wait, let me see a little bit more. That was pretty good. Let's just want more. But I do think that he flashes well in many instances. So we'll see how that works out for him at the next level. Last and perhaps not least on the afternoon, evening, morning, whenever you may be listening or watching this program, tight end Mason Taylor. Yes, that Mason Taylor. Yes, son of NFL Hall of Famer or soon-to-be Hall of Famer or whomever, Jaxson Taylor, just an absurd defensive end at the NFL level. Third-team All-SEC in 2024, again, playing for LSU. And in doing so, he actually had 55 receptions this past season, which was the school single-season record for a tight end, because he's the only tight end in school history with 100-plus receptions and 1,000 plus receiving yards over that time. And Mason Taylor this past season, 55 catches, 546 yards, 2 touchdowns, and in an offense that people were thinking is probably going to fall apart after Jaden Daniels went to the NFL, Mason Taylor showed, hey, he's got something to show and to prove this past season, even with the inconsistent play at quarterback that they had down there in Baton Rouge. Mason Taylor, Zach, another buzzy name after the Senior Bowl. And in this process now that we've been in, what do you have on him?
I thought for a second you were going to say that he was the only tight end in LSU history, just full stop. But
it was.
But I was being offended for Kyle and his Thaddeus Moss love.
No, Bret the Hitman Hart style. The best there is, the best there was, the best there ever will be. Mason Taylor.
Family is great. They can surround you like a cocoon. They love you unconditionally. And they can take some pressure off when you're facing difficult situations like declaring for the NFL draft. Unless you're Mason Taylor and your family has 8 first-team All-Pro selections, 13 Pro Bowls, a Defensive Player of the Year award, a College Football Hall of Fame induction, and 2 Pro Football Hall of Famers in Dad Jaxson Taylor and Uncle Zach Thomas. It's no wonder Mason Taylor ended up on the offensive side of the ball. I wouldn't want to deal with that pressure either. But Mason Taylor is built like a defensive end, and he has the lithe power to run through contact on interior routes. But Taylor is really at his best on routes that do the separating for him. Outs underneath zones, hitches against soft man coverage. Rarely do you see a player as intelligent in the screen game as Mason Taylor. Rather than immediately throwing himself into a block and risking a pass interference call, he takes his cue from the defender in front of him, waiting for that player to react before absolutely burying him. I really love that. Like, he frees up some receivers and running backs behind him by just being cerebral. Taylor is also a tremendous player at reestablishing himself as a receiver after he chips a defender. So often you saw him get that little block and then leaks out, releasing into space, catching the ball over the top of his defender that he let go, and then adding chunk yardages after that catch.
Yeah, and in the midst of that, Zach, he's consistently showing good hands on film, and I think that he does a good job of tracking the ball too. I do think that his agility, burst, some of those things may come into question, but I think that he shows enough talent in that role to be an interesting player. Now, to be a fantasy standout or even a standout in his own offense, that would remain to be seen. But I guess let's just close out on his weaknesses, because I don't know that he's going to be a player that we're going to be looking at in the top halves of our fantasy drafts come April, May, June.
Yeah, I think at the tight end position, success in the NFL and for fantasy often stems from being a two-way player at tight end, being an offensive weapon, but also being able to block well enough to stay on the field in the red zone. I think, unfortunately, Mason Taylor's run blocking technique is exactly the same as his pass blocking technique. He tends to get way too far upright and forego any push or explosion. And because of this, he can get pushed back into rushing lanes and really be a detriment to, and especially if we're talking red zone and wanting to power run, I don't love that. He also struggles to create separations on more complex downfield routes like crosses and posts. I don't think he does a great job when the separation isn't created for him, and he's got to be a little bit shifty to create separation. And when he's playing in traffic, Taylor allows the ball to travel in on his body while he battles for position. While Mason Taylor is a talented tight end, I think it's pretty unlikely that he follows in his father's footsteps to Canton. In fact, while he probably becomes a functional tight end for his future NFL team, Mason Taylor just doesn't feel much like an impact player for fantasy purposes at all.
Yeah, man, and it's shocking too because again, you get this guy who is 6'5", 250, measures that way, and he doesn't test at the combine. Pro day for LSU isn't until later this month. I think it's maybe another week or so away. I'm just curious to see if for whatever reason he had bulked up to get to that number of 250 for the combine in order to possibly really play at or perform at whatever his normal weight is, because I didn't see 6'5", 250 on film, and I didn't see the play style of someone 6'5", 250 in terms of the physicality in the trenches and being able to sustain things of that nature, though. However, as Mr. Scampers in the chat puts, his ability on the gauntlet drill. Hey, the gauntlet drill at the combine, he was smooth, and people are going crazy over it and watching it on 2x speed and even slowing it down to 0.5. How amazing it was, Zach. So, yeah, that's Mason Taylor, and curious to see how he shakes out again when we think through next steps in this process. Zach, it's 8 players, one night. Let's talk through the quarterbacks first. Again, when we're talking film grades here, who do you have at the top? Who do you have at the bottom? And who are we not even talking about in the middle?
This is just a mess of a quarterback class. I think for me, the grades came out really, really close compared to other classes, but also down from some other classes. I've got Jaxson Dart as my quarterback 1 by half a point, but it's primarily based on his mobility and what he gives you with his legs. I got Cam Ward at 2, but again, if Dart goes in the second, then you draft Cam Ward. I mean, that's just kind of how this shakes out. And Shedeur Sanders pulls up the rear. A fine player, but I'm not trusting him for fantasy. And again, this is a class to me where some of these specific players, where we're talking quarterback and tight end, I think they're getting pushed up into the first round. And it's the Admiral Akbar. It's a trap, where I'm going to avoid that and be happy taking running backs, be happy that my wide receivers that I want fall to the second round. And so we'll be happy that we're talking about them. We'll be happy that other people are talking more glowingly about them. And that's just kind of how I'm going to attack this. Again, asymmetrical class.
It's so interesting how that works out. My film grades, I did have Cam Ward, for me, head and shoulders above both of these guys. Also with a score that wasn't as high as many of the other classes. And again, we talk about mixed success there, but the Cam Ward is my 1. I do have Shedeur as my 2, and I still think flashes of Jaxson Dart when we're thinking through, like the ETR guys, the established run guys often say, what do you win when you win? I do think that if Jaxson Dart somehow gets to his perceived ceiling, I do think you unlock something very different than you would if Shedeur goes about it, and Shedeur being ideally, if he becomes the quick processor, ball out, really special type of player, like the top of that tier. And again, I think Brock Purdy does a really good job of that. But like the top of that tier is probably Joe Burrow, right? The super processor, super accurate, good at many places of the field, but not the strongest of arms. And again, I'm not comparing. So people aren't confused. I'm not comparing Shedeur Sanders to Joe Burrow. I'm just saying
that's what I heard.
That's going to be like the best
title of the episode.
No, please, Lord, no. But I just really want him anticipating more of the likes of the Brock Purdys of the world, because I think that Brock Purdy does an incredible job of that. Let's get over to tight ends real quick, Zach. With the 5, and I'll jump in here first, just to give you a moment there. In film grades, I did have Colton Loveland grade out just ahead of Tyler Warren, and I like Tyler Warren a good bit as a player. I've already mentioned that, but the way that Colton Loveland was moving, and I think some of the special things that he can do in the route to be able to get open, to be able to be a target for his quarterback, and even at the catch point, I really like what he does. Tyler Warren slightly below him there, and then I feel like there's for me a pretty heavy teardrop for scoring. I've got Harold Fannin as my 3, but he just beats out Elijjah Arroyo and then Mason Taylor coming in 5th there when we think about the film scores. But the top 2 guys are the ones that I'm most excited about, and I just thought Harold Fannin did a lot of fun things. But from a blocking standpoint, it's lacking. But again, that's not the game that we play. But regardless, those are things that help you get on the field. But Zach, when thinking through these 5 tight ends, how do you have them shaking out?
It's interesting. I got Loveland at the top as well, pretty clearly. And then it's a tier for me of Fannin and Warren. And I have Fannin just above. And I know that's blasphemous. I know, but
they're gonna come after you.
It's just how it shakes out. I don't know. It's the process. Trust the process. I don't know. I've been pretty successful with tight ends, but this may be one where Fannin's undersized. Obviously, it hasn't translated very well, other than Bowers last year being the same size. Although I think Bowers is probably a little better athlete than Fannin.
Yeah.
But so Fannin and Warren, and then Taylor. After a pretty considerable teardrop, and then Arroyo. So again, we're on Loveland, I guess, is really the takeaway from this. And no, he's not a first-round pick for me. We're back out of the realm of first-round tight ends. In fact, in the last 8 years, there's been exactly 1.5 because of Bosch. But 1 first-round tight end. And when we talked Pitts a few years ago, we did the tight end show and said, don't take him in the first round. And then the hype got so big that we came back and did a second show and said, game theory says, take him, trade him for 2 firsts, because 2 firsts is better than 1 first. #math.
You love when the maths. That's a positive thing if you can get that to go. Zach, that's 8 players in less than 75 minutes. We did a pretty good job there. Well done.
We did really well. It is not anything I did at all. It's the fact that I put myself with perhaps the greatest host in the business, but at least in the pantheon of hosts of fantasy football podcasts. And I appreciate you.
Look, I'm glad to be able to do it. Thank you for allowing me to ride on your wings. This is always a fun time. And folks, we are finally here. Quarterbacks, tight ends, wide receivers, running backs, all in the books for you boys here with the Dynasty Dummies. Now it's time to play Pokemon and catch them all. It's time for the catch all episodes. So again, if you got those names that you want to be able to hear out from us, Look, we've been collecting them as we've gone. Not sure exactly how many players that we'll get to for the catch-alls, but I'm pretty confident, Zach, that we're likely going to have at minimum 2 catch-all shows to be able to address the needs that have come up to this point. And it's been a really fun ride. So I'm excited to continue that for at least a couple more weeks with the Hootenanny. But again, the LaQuint Allens, so many of the running backs that I know that you all were not thrilled that we've skipped on to this point. We've got you. We're coming back to them. We've got wide receivers that we're going to circle back to as well. I'm excited, Zach, that the fun's not over just yet.
Yeah, man, we've gotten a bunch of DMs, a bunch of people standing out on my front lawn yelling like, "You got to talk Tootin, you got to talk DJ Giddens, LaQuint Allen, Damian Martinez." So like we're getting there. But if you have been here, been riding with us, you've heard the 32 names that we've talked already. And if you think we've missed somebody, again, let us know, because we are trying to do this for you. If it doesn't help you, then it doesn't make sense for us to be doing it. And so part of what to me is so much fun about doing the Hootenanny and doing it the way we do is this class participation portion of the program. So we appreciate everybody who's given feedback. If you're listening and want to give feedback, feel free to reach out to me at Tacit Assassin 13. Feel free to reach out to JMic at JMic Check. Feel free to reach out to the Dynasty Dummies. Even if you send it to Fantasy Cares, Bob Gilchrist is monitoring all of those channels for us, and he will get those names there. I guarantee it, because Bob is a big-time Devy guy, and he wants to know about all the players that he has on all his rosters. So make sure you do that. But we really, really appreciate you riding with us, listening. I know it's been quite a Hootenanny already. The 5 shows that we've done have all been so much fun. The chat makes it great. The listeners make it great. It's a labor of love, and it's always fun. It's nice to have that reciprocity. It's nice to have you taking something from it. So we appreciate you listening. JMic is at JMic Check. I am at Tacit Assassin 13. This has been the Dynasty Dummies 2025 Rookie Hootenanny. Thank you for listening.